So before I begin this video talking about FC Dallas and their moving forward series, I hope everybody that is in Dallas and also everybody in Texas is doing all right now. I mean, I've heard about the horrible weather condition that is going on in Texas, and that there is a lot of people in Texas that is still do not have power, and some people have also have problem with their drinking water because of their water pipe being freeze over because of the cold weather that's going around Texas. But yeah, hopefully everybody is doing okay. I have seen that their weather is starting to get a little bit better in the upcoming days, but it is definitely something that I don't think a lot of those people in Texas would have thought that this would actually happen and have just such a terrible winter storm that I don't think a lot of them were even prepared for all of this. And that, certainly right now they're trying their best to cope with this, even though I know a lot of them are having a lot of difficulty because of it. But that being said, let us actually get into today's moving forward series. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about FC Dallas, who I think this is the last team we're going to talk about in the moving forward series that got eliminated in the conference semifinal. And if that is the case, that means we're now going to have 4 more teams to talk about in the moving forward series. And hopefully I can wrap up this moving forward series and look at every single team in terms of their 2020 season by the time preseason is going to begin in a couple of weeks. But talking about Dallas, they finished with a record of 9-7-6, and they finished with 34 points. They scored 28 goals this season while allowing 24 goals, which was actually the second fewest goals that they allow in the Western Conference. Only the Seattle Sounders actually allowed less goals than Dallas did this season, so certainly their defense was one of their big strong points. And also, I just realized their goal differential is not -4, it's actually +4. That is their goal differential, so I'm gonna just quickly make a minor adjustment there. And of course, they finished with a goal differential of +4, and they finished 6th in the Western Conference. But unfortunately, the old saying, the Cascadia Curse that Dallas seems to always have. Well, actually, it's not really an old saying. It's more kind of something that I'm pretty sure Dallas fans are kind of always have nightmares about. Where once the team gets into the playoffs, it always seems like death, taxes, and Dallas getting eliminated by either the Seattle Sounders or the Portland Timbers. And this time, they got eliminated by the Seattle Sounders for the second year in a row. And I believe this is also now the 4th time in the last 7 seasons that Dallas has been eliminated by the Seattle Sounders. And that is got to be brutal if you're a Dallas fan, knowing the fact that the Sounders pretty much is now property of FC Dallas whenever they face each other in a playoff matchup. Now, they're also one of the 2 teams that did not make it to the MLS's back tournament, the other being Nashville SC because of the whole COVID situation. Although they're kind of the first team that was kind of confirmed that they were going to be participating in the MLS's back tournament, because before we heard about Nashville having kind of almost similar amount of players that got tested positive, and that they also have a COVID outbreak just days before the tournament began. Dallas actually had a lot that issue just a couple of weeks leading up to the tournament, and it was pretty much cement that just a couple of weeks before the tournament began in July, that it was pretty obvious that Dallas was not going to participate in the MLS's back tournament because of the COVID outbreak that they're dealing with their team. Now, in terms of the MVP of this team, and I'm actually going to go with 2 players for the MVP and disappointment. And these 2 players, one of those players, I'm going to give the MVP and disappointment based on these young guys that is on this Dallas team and guys that came out of the Dallas Academy. And then the second guy I'll give for the MVP and disappointment are kind of more veteran players on this team, and players that might have been with this team for a while, or guys that they recently signed during the offseason. So for the MVP for guys that came out of the Dallas Academy, I'm going to give it to Bryan Reynolds. And this was actually difficult to choose who exactly is the MVP out of all these young guys that came out of the Dallas Academy and are homegrown to this team, because you could definitely make the case that guys like Tanner Tessman and even Ricardo Pepi, who could be deserved to be on this MVP list. But at the end of the day, I'm decided to go with Bryan Reynolds, and I think the tiebreaker in terms of me going with him instead of the other guy I've mentioned is that he ended up was able to get his big money European move, and Dallas was able to cash in and get a record amount of money to able to sell Bryan Reynolds to Roma, and able to get almost an 8-figure amount of transfer fee in order to do that. Now for the MVP for in terms of veteran player, I'm gonna go with Franco Jara, the guy that they just signed this off season. And Jara, even though I know near the latter part of the season he definitely cooled off a little bit, and he had that rough patch heading into the playoffs, he still finished top goal scorer of this team. And there was always that debate coming into this season when Dallas bought Franco Jara, and that is there a discussion of who exactly is going to be the number 9 for Dallas. Is it going to be Jara, or is it going to be Ojancic? Well, it turns out that Zdeněk Ojancic left this team, and once he, of course, decided to leave this team, that discussion was pretty much ended, and it was pretty clear that Franco Jara was going to have that number 9 spot and be their number 9 throughout the season. And he definitely showcased some promising that they had that Dallas thought that he could be, and definitely is a guy that I think, given a full season, he could definitely be a guy that could be a double-digit goal scorer for this team. Now, in terms of disappointment for guys that is coming out of the academy and young guys out of this FC Dallas squad, it's got to be Jesus Ferreira. And I know Ferreira had a good January camp with the U.S. men's national team, and he was pretty much the man of the match in that game against Trinidad and Tobago a couple of weeks ago. And that I'm hoping that Dallas would be really hoping that kind of performance might be a way to kind of spark his confidence back and kind of get back to the promising player that he had a year ago. Because last season, yeah, he basically suffered what you call a sophomore slump, where he only scored 1 goal and 1 assist, and really a guy that just kind of fell out of favor in the starting 11. And for a guy that a year ago was able to score 8 goals, and really a lot of people were kind of even making comparison that he's going to be just like his father, David Ferreira, not only to be a great player for this Dallas team, but he could be another guy that could be the next player to be potentially making the jump to Europe, and Dallas eventually cash him for a big amount of money. Well, unfortunately, that seems like it has taken a little bit of a setback, but as I said, because he had that good January camp and that he did well in that game against Trinidad and Tobago, maybe that will give him some confidence heading into this season and get back to what many people said, that he is definitely one of the best hot prospect out of this FC Dallas team. Now, in terms of veteran player for disappointment, there were definitely a couple of players I could have gone with disappointment, but I decided to go with Santiago Mosquera, and I could argue that I could have even put both of the DP that FC Dallas had on the disappointment list. I could have easily gone with Brian Acosta onto the disappointment list too, because just once he, of course, came back from injury, he actually made this team look worse when he was in the starting 11 and back from injury. But I still decided to go with Mosquera, and even though Mosquera did score 4 goals and he did finish as the top 2 goal scorer of this team, 3 of those 4 goals came in that hat trick against the Colorado Rapids. And besides that incredible performance that he had in that game, yeah, his rest of the season has been an absolute disaster. And it just feels like as the year goes long, Mosquera has really become a guy that kind of is falling out of favor with this FC Dallas team. And it's kind of shocked the fact that Dallas have not even think about potentially get rid of him, although I'm assuming they probably did that during this offseason by declining his contract and kind of let go him as their DP. And that I also said many times before, where anytime when you have a DP that is not performing, or you're basically putting him on the bench for majority of the game, yeah, you know that there's some serious issue that is going on with your team. And the only saving grace for Dallas of why they're one of these teams that, even though they have their DP not performing at the way that you want your designated player to perform on your team, their saving grace is because of the fact that they have such a good academy, and these young guys are performing so well with this team that it kind of neglect in terms of how bad in some of their off-season signing and some of the guys that is on big contract and considered to be designated player that is not actually performing with this team. Now, in terms of the top goal scorer, we got Frank O'Hara finished with 7 goals, followed by Ryan Hollinshead and as I mentioned, Santiago Mosquera both finished with 4 goals and tie second in terms of the top goal scorer for this team. Then you got Fafa Pico with 3 goals, followed by Rito Ziegler to round off the top goal scorer list with 2 goals to his name. Top assist leader, you got Michael Barrios led the team with 5 assists for Dallas, although he's no longer part of this team after Dallas decided to not bring him back during this offseason. Then you got the recently sold Bryan Reynolds with 3 assists, followed by Brian Acosta and Fafa Pico, and also Andres Ricarte, both finished with 2 assists to round out the top 5 list in terms of the top assist leader chart for this Dallas team. Now, what went right for Dallas this season? Well, they temporarily stopped the Cascadia Curse by beating the Portland Timbers, and that you could also say that was kind of one, if not the biggest upset in the first round of the playoffs, because not a lot of people would have thought that Dallas would be going into Providence Park and able to win against the Timbers team that a lot of people thought that they were an MLS Cup contender, but they did exactly that by winning in a penalty kick shootout. Although, as I mentioned, they temporarily stopped in terms of that Cascadia Curse, because as I will mention a little bit later, and technically I already mentioned it in this moving forward series, they eventually got eliminated by the Sounders, and that Cascadia Curse is still the case for this Dallas team. The Academy continued to produce young, exciting talent. I mean, this is kind of a yearly thing that I'm always going to put what went right with this Dallas team. I mean, their Academy, alongside with the Union Academy, and in some extent the Red Bulls and RSL Academy, are considered the best academy in the league, and it's just such a great thing to see an MLS team able to really trust their academy and continue to produce these young players that not only they could do well in MLS, but these could be guys that could potentially make the jump to Europe, and also guys that they could definitely be hot prospect to maybe one day even make it into the U.S. men's national team. And then finally, talking about those young, exciting talent, they were able to sell one of them during this offseason by selling Bryan Reynolds to AS Roma for a record amount of transfer fee. Another thing that I also would want to mention is that they also did so Reggie Cannon during the middle of the season for a big sum of money, but still it's not as much as what you say Bryan Reynolds does, and especially with Reynolds going to an established club that is AS Roma in Serie A. I think this move definitely is a bigger deal compared to Reggie Cannon decided to go to Portugal and go to Boavista. And although it's still a European club, it's definitely not as a well-known name as, let's say Roma, or even at one point Juventus was a team that was interested to potentially get Reynolds from FC Dallas. So what went wrong with this team? Well, inconsistency was the biggest problem with this Dallas team, and there's a reason why a lot of people coming into the playoffs didn't consider this Dallas team to be MLS Cup contender and that they could suffer an early playoff exit, and that's because of inconsistency. And when you look at that October stretch that they were so bad during that October stretch that there was even talks, and I even at one point even said that, man, they look like they're having something similar to what happened in 2016 when they completely unravel and went on to miss the playoffs, and it looked like they were heading to that same path again. But thankfully they were able to get some points in the last couple of games during this season. But other than that October stretch was absolutely terrible. But what's also interesting is before that October their stretch in September, they were actually doing very well, and were looking to be one of those teams that maybe could even finish in the top half of the Western Conference table. But as I mentioned, because of how bad their October stretches, they basically went back down to earth and end up only finished 6th in the Western Conference. The road form continued to be a problem for this Dallas team. They, alongside with 3 other teams in the Western Conference, only registered 1 road win this season, which is by far the fewest any team in the Western Conference has had. And I think them, alongside with LAFC, are the only MLS as or the only Western Conference team that make it to the playoffs with just only one road wins to their name in the regular season. And yeah, this is going to be something that Dallas is going to have to fix heading into next season. And I know this has been always an issue with this team, where for whatever reason this team always struggle whenever they go on the road. If you want to consider yourself MLS Cup contender, or if you want to have home field advantage heading into the playoffs, and especially now with the playoffs being a single elimination, and you have to be in the top 4 position if you want to at least host one home games, yeah, you got to make sure you got to win those road games. Otherwise, you're probably going to have to play all your game in the playoffs on the road. And then finally, the Cascadia Curse. You know, I talk about how it's temporary stop with them beating the Portland Timbers. Well, it's still alive because of the fact that they lose to the Seattle Sounders, and that I think now this is now the 9th season in a row where Dallas have been either eliminated by the Portland Timbers and the Seattle Sounders. And actually, it's not 9 seasons in a row, but more like 9 playoff appearance in a row that they've been knocked out by the Seattle Sounders or the Portland Timbers. And yeah, I'm pretty sure anytime when Dallas goes into the playoffs, I'm pretty sure their fans are really hoping they do not play one of those teams, because they know what's going to happen when they play one of those teams, judging by the brutal history that they had against those teams in the playoffs. So moving forward for this Dallas team, who's going to be the next name that coming out of this Dallas Academy, or even in their USL affiliate team, North Texas FC, playing in the USL League One, that is going to come up and graduate into the senior team, and by the end of the year, we of course will know his name. I don't think a lot of people would, in the beginning of the season, would have thought that Bryan Reynolds was going to be a household name, and heck, even guys like Tanner Tessman and Ricardo Pepi, I don't think a lot of people would have heard of them and say that they could be a name that could potentially be the next hot prospect, and could potentially be the next guy that is making the jump to Europe. So yeah, this is going to be interesting to see by next year who is going to be that next player that we might not know right now who exactly he is, but by the end of the year we definitely know who he is, because he performed very well with this Dallas team. And heck, even if they don't play for Dallas, and I know there's also some players that come out of the Dallas Academy, they actually go straight into Europe. There are 2 names that I can know that came out of the Dallas Academy and they went straight to Europe, is Chris Richer and recently Justin Chi, both going to Bayern Munich, and we now know that they are kind of those players that could be hot prospect in terms of not only be a decent player in the Bundesliga, but also notable guys that is going to do well in Europe that came out of the Dallas Academy, despite the fact that they never play for the senior team, and just kind of skip that process of you going into the senior team before making that move to go to Europe. Speaking of that, you know, the other question moving forward for Dallas is who's going to be most likely the next Dallas Academy prodigy, or maybe the next young Dallas player on this team that is going to move to Europe. With Bryan Reynolds being the most recent guy, you got guys like Tanner Tessman, who else? Paxton Palmico, and also Jesus Ferreira, and all these other guys that are definitely guys that could potentially be making the jump to Europe by the end of the season. I mean, if I have to choose out of those 3 guys, I forgot to even mention Ricardo Pepi as another guy that could most likely make the jump to Europe. But if I had to name all those 4 players, and who do I think is going to most likely to be the next player to make the jump to Europe, I'm going to say Paxton Palmico, even though I know Palmico had a lot of injury issue, and that he basically were out for the entire season because of that torn ACL that he suffered. But I'm assuming he's going to come back strong heading into next season. And keep in mind, he's already known as one of not the hottest prospect out of this Dallas team. And if he is able to have a great comeback next season, and some would even maybe say that he could be a nomination and could be a guy that could win the comeback player of the year heading into next season if he does well. But I'm going to bank that he is going to be the guy that most likely is going to move to Europe. Now, that being said, don't be surprised. It's not just going to be Paxton Pomykal as the next Dallas Academy prodigy that come out of the academy, play for the senior team, and now move to Europe. You know, those guys that I've just mentioned, like Ricardo Pepi and Jesus Ferreira, or even what was the other guy that I forgot to mention. But yeah, you get what I said about all these guys that could potentially all make their move to Europe by the end of next season. And then finally, the last thing for the moving forward series for FC Dallas is that, you know, Dallas has kind of find themselves in the same situation that I talked about at SKC in my last moving forward series, where they're kind of in this sticky situation where they're good enough to make it to the playoffs, but once they make it to the playoffs, that's when problems start to come, and that they don't seem to have enough talent and enough of an attacking power that they can go up against some of the best team in the Western Conference, like LAFC, the Seattle Sounders. So it will be very interesting to see this offseason whether if they can of course address that and maybe add some more talent, or maybe some of these kids can finally make the strides that they can really be considered they're an MLS Cup contender. And also, most importantly, can these kids that now that they know that they have suffered for a couple or maybe a year of them suffer the usual Cascadia Curse, where Dallas get eliminated by either the Sounders and the Portland Timbers, that next year is going to be different. This is finally going to be the year where they're going to try to end that curse. But either way, that is pretty much it for the moving forward series. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this moving forward series that I talked about with FC Dallas? If you're a Dallas fan, what do you think went right, what went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, what you going to think is going to happen with this team? But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.